A double-headed penguin lay dead at the entrance of the research station. They claimed it was just a genetic mutation. But when the skin of the corpse was slashed open, something emerged. Thick, black, sticky tentacles. The Antarctic winter climate was harsh, and only 4 people were staying through the winter at the station. I was the sole doctor. The penguin's death was a gruesome sight. Its body cruelly torn open from the middle of the 2 heads all the way to the abdomen, with intestines scattered all over the floor. Under the skin of the corpse, there seemed to be countless maggots crawling around, pulling the layer of flesh up and down as if they were about to burst out at any moment. Captain James stood beside me, an adult double-headed penguin, probably the first case we need to document this. No, I shook my head in horror. How could there be maggots in Antarctica? I crouched down and cut the skin with a knife. Viscous black liquid slowly oozed out from the skin's incision, with numerous disgusting tentacles protruding menacingly. You could even hear the limbs rubbing against each other, making a squish-squish sound. I thrust the knife, but the liquid just separated in the middle, bypassed the blade, and reassembled. Stand back. James raised a flamethrower, incinerating the abomination. The radio had been out of order since the last storm, and satellite communication lost its signal. We were stranded in isolation. At 3 in the morning, as I slept soundly, I was awakened by an increasingly bright light. Peering through the glass, despite the long polar night, the world outside was blindingly bright. Before my eyes, an endless expanse of green bushes emitted a silky, flowing glow, all pointing in the same direction. I exclaimed and hastily put on my clothes before stepping outside, but my body immediately began to tremble uncontrollably. Bushes came from all directions, endless and without a visible end, enclosing the research station in an impenetrable barrier. The penguin's body, pierced by branches, was riddled with holes, almost merging with the vegetation. Carefully cutting through the bush branches, the same black liquid as before slowly oozed out. Meanwhile, I seemed to hear murmurs coming from all directions, and my heart pounded uncontrollably, a sense of suffocation overwhelming me. Suddenly, someone called out to me, "David. What are you doing?" James's voice snapped me out of the terror. Coming to my senses, I realized I had unknowingly walked into the depths of the bushes. The bushes I had cut were withered, deprived of the protection of the black liquid, unable to survive in Antarctica. As for that mass of liquid, resembling undeveloped larvae, after struggling on the ground, it gradually solidified into something like a block of black charcoal. I said, "They seem to have a symbiotic relationship." The alarm sounded, and the 4 of us attempted to dig into the roots of these bushes. But after a busy night, after chiseling through nearly a meter of ice, there was still no end in sight. We speculated that their roots had already penetrated the frozen soil, greedily absorbing the nutrients of this continent. It was unimaginable what would happen if these unknown organisms took shape. We couldn't sit idly by. James and I decided to explore the end of the glow, while the other 2 stayed at the research station to attempt communication with the outside world. Our journey surprisingly went smoothly, and we eventually arrived at a massive ice cavern. The light emitted by the bushes disappeared entirely here, as if swallowed by a black hole. For safety reasons, James decided to go down alone, securing a rope around himself, and I would pull him back if there was any danger. This way, even in case of an accident, I, as a doctor, could be of assistance. The walkie-talkie remained on, and I could clearly hear the sound of rocks falling. "Old Di, there's something amazing down here." At this point, James had stopped climbing and began walking on level ground. Unable to contain my curiosity, I asked, "What's inside?" "Nothing, just..." But before James could finish his sentence, his voice abruptly turned into a scream of utmost terror. "Help me! What happened?" While speaking, I pulled the rope, but the other end felt light, meaning the rope had already snapped. James's cries in the walkie-talkie vanished, leaving only the crackling sound of electricity. Though mentally prepared, seeing the cut end still tainted with black liquid made my heart skip a beat. An unprecedented sense of despair overwhelmed me. I gasped for air, almost suffocating myself. Simultaneously, I once again heard that strange murmuring. Despite the clearer sound, I couldn't discern what was making it or what it was saying. Suddenly, as if inexplicably, my heart tightened, fear pouring out uncontrollably. The only remaining shred of reason told me to run. Leaving behind a new rope and supplies, I sprinted back as fast as I could. Due to the distance, I couldn't contact the other two team members on the walkie-talkie. Not knowing how long I had been running, I collapsed in exhaustion, but as soon as I sat down, I caught a whiff of a pungent, bloody odor. As a doctor, I am highly sensitive to the smell of blood. Pushing aside the bushes, I saw an indescribable monstrosity lying within. This thing was entirely red, as most of its flesh had undergone tearing and rearrangement, revealing the primitive nature of blood and meat. A body folded 180 degrees from the waist up, with legs at a 45-degree angle, creating a space for its head. In the mouth of this head, a baby-thin arm unexpectedly grew. Starting from the folded waist, the body was still connected to a half-shaved head and an adult's arm and leg. Using tools, I flipped the body over, discovering a similarly horrifying sight on its back. A gaping wound almost piercing through the entire upper body, where you could clearly see the internal organs, squeezed to the edge by a fleshy ball with numerous mouths. I recoiled in horror. Even as a doctor, I couldn't suppress the nausea churning in my stomach. At that moment, I suddenly understood that the double-headed penguin might not have been cruelly torn in half, but rather a failed fusion. From a pile of decomposed flesh, I retrieved an identification card, and unsurprisingly, it belonged to one of the missing expedition members from this summer. I never expected their fate to be so tragic. There was nothing more for me to misunderstand. Antarctica harbors a massive crisis, and I must bring this information back. The walkie-talkie crackled at this moment, and I quickly shouted, "This is David. Captain James is." Before I could finish, my words were cut off by the urgent voices of my teammates. "Come back quickly, something's gone wrong." In our greenhouse, the vegetables we planted underwent mutation. At 6 a.m., Chef Sophia discovered that the sprouted vegetables from the day before had matured. By 10 a.m., when she contacted me via the walkie-talkie, these vegetables had grown to half the height of a person. When I returned to the research station around 1 p.m., these vegetables had almost reached the ceiling. They intertwined and crossed each other, even devouring and merging with one another. I had never seen such a bizarre scene. Cabbage leaves were as large as banana leaves, with potatoes growing integrated into them. And when the original potatoes were unearthed, they revealed irregularly shaped tomatoes. As for the tomatoes, they had roots entwined with celery and lettuce leaves, growing meters long. Before we could recover from the shock, these vegetables suddenly came to life. A green tentacle, as thick as an arm, emerged from somewhere, directly dragging Matthew, who was standing beside me, to the ground. The strength of the tentacle was astonishing. Matthew, weighing nearly 200 kilograms, was dragged 3 meters away in the blink of an eye. Matthew screamed, "Daigo! Save me!" In an instant, I seemed to hear James's cries before his death. I don't know where I found the strength. I used my legs to throw myself out, pinning Matthew down immediately. I took out my knife and cut the tentacle. Green slime splattered on my face, and the strange and nauseating smell immediately made me feel like I was going to vomit. In front of me, the broken green tentacle even writhed in agony, resembling a gigantic centipede. "Flamethrower!" I shouted at Sophia, who was frozen outside the door. But as if understanding human speech, a thinner tentacle immediately passed through the gap under the door, knocking the flamethrower away. At the same time, 7 or 8 thick tentacles attacked again with contracted pupils. I instinctively protected Matthew. It was okay if I died, but Matthew was the maintenance guy, only he could fix the radio, and we needed that hope. My hands and feet were quickly bound. Unlike Matthew's tentacle, these tentacles were equipped with spikes that easily pierced through clothes and into my skin. However, the most horrifying part was when these tentacles dragged my limbs, and those spikes brutally cut through my flesh, my bones. I only felt the intertwining pain nerves pressing straight to my skull, as if my entire head was about to explode. "Ah, kill me!" I screamed in agony, pleadingly looking at Matthew, but he was also powerless. Bang! Suddenly, I was dragged and slammed onto a table. The back of my head hit the edge of the table perfectly. My vision went black, and I only heard the roars of Matthew and Sophia before losing consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I was surprised to see James. Sophia explained that not only did James not die, but he also came back in the nick of time and saved my life again. That day, he encountered an ambush by the black liquid in the cave, falling into a deeper pit. Fortunately, the pit wasn't too deep, and he only lost consciousness for a while. Upon waking up, he carefully searched the area but only found some meteorite fragments. Besides that, there was nothing unusual. Strangely, these meteorite fragments didn't have any special features and didn't contain any radiation elements, probably unrelated to the massive mutation this time. However, the glow of those bushes did indeed disappear from that location. I sighed in relief temporarily. Nothing else mattered as long as everyone was okay. By the way, did you see those bodies when you came back? I saw them. James and I briefly recounted the scene at that time, and our accounts matched. This at least indicated that I wasn't hallucinating. Sophia turned pale with fear. Did it start so early? No one spoke, and the surroundings fell into a deathly silence. Isolated in Antarctica, killer mutated plants, eerie black liquid, everything was driving us to the brink of collapse. Is the radio fixed? I urgently wanted to leave this place. However, as soon as I finished speaking, Matthew stumbled in, his face almost drained of color. It's over. It's all over. Matthew cried in despair, speaking in a stutter. The radio, it's smashed. I just went to the toilet. What? The mouths of the three of us almost dropped open. The most terrifying thing wasn't that the radio was smashed, but the fact that there were only 4 people at the research station. Matthew had gone to the toilet, and the remaining 3 of us had been in the ward all along. Could there be a 5th person at the research station? I murmured in a low voice, my whole body covered in goosebumps. The expressions of the other 3 were just as grim as mine. Just when the atmosphere became extremely eerie, Matthew suddenly remembered something and excitedly clapped his hands. The video camera. The video camera is still on. Matthew rushed out like crazy and soon brought back a video camera. According to him, he liked talking to the camera when he felt nervous, and he didn't stop recording even when he went to the toilet. Matthew, you've done a great job, the 3 of us couldn't help but exclaim. Soon, the video started playing. From the moment Matthew left the communication room, our 4 pairs of eyes stared as if they were glued to the screen, afraid to miss any details. Time was ticking away, and after about half a minute, a shadow entered the camera's frame. Although the shadow was elongated by the light, we could still see that this person had a slightly chubby figure. Another half-minute passed, and the person still hadn't entered the frame. However, from the sound, we could tell that he was probably rummaging for the hammer that smashed the radio. Matthew stared angrily at the screen, his emotions more intense than any of us. Who the hell is it? As he spoke, the person finally walked into view. However, the next moment, as we all clearly saw the person's face, everyone was left in shocked silence. This is impossible! Matthew screamed. We locked Matthew in his own room. Although he repeatedly emphasized that he didn't do it, the footage on the video camera was inexplicable. But we also found it strange. If it was really Matthew, why would he voluntarily bring out the video camera? He didn't even need to record from the beginning. On this night, I lay in bed unable to sleep no matter what. The greenhouse had been destroyed, and our food source had dwindled by more than half. The radio was also completely damaged, and we could only hope for the day when satellite signals would be restored. The problem was, could we survive until then? Now, every time I closed my eyes, I could see those wriggling black tentacles moving between the flesh, making a poochie-poochie sound. In the end, I got up and went to the laboratory to study the meteorite fragment that James brought back. At first, indeed, as James said, it was just an ordinary stone with no apparent value. But until I boredly began piecing together the fragments, I suddenly discovered something that made my hair stand on end. In the center of this meteorite, there was a very regular spherical space, about the size of a fist, as if something used to live inside. I didn't want to scare myself, but I couldn't help but consider this direction. If it wasn't for some unknown creature inside, how else could you explain these bizarre occurrences? My heart pounded, and I couldn't wait to share my discovery with my teammates. However, when I passed by Matthew's room, I found that his room was unexpectedly lit. As far as I knew, Matthew couldn't sleep with the lights on, but at this hour, he should be sleeping. I curiously knocked on the door. Matthew, why aren't you sleeping so late? However, there was no response from inside. I persisted, but I could also understand Matthew's feelings, so I softened my tone. We know you're not that kind of person, so we just want to find out the truth and clear your name. After waiting for about 5 minutes with no sign of movement, I couldn't help but start worrying about Matthew's safety. Could he have done something drastic? I quickly bent down and observed the situation through the keyhole. The room was tidy, with no signs of damage, and of course, no sign of Matthew. Just as I was puzzled and preparing to take a closer look, suddenly, a pair of eyes filled with crimson blood vessels, unusually protruding, met mine. Those were Matthew's eyes. He suddenly began violently banging on the iron door, his nails scraping against the metal, producing a piercing friction sound. "It's not me. It's not me." His voice was as if someone had removed his windpipe, only producing unclear syllables, hoarse and suffocating. I recoiled in terror, cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. How did he become like this? The loud commotion quickly brought James and Sophia to the scene. I was about to say Matthew had gone mad, but the Matthew inside the room suddenly quieted down. "What's going on?" Sophia had the key, and she immediately opened the door. As we pushed the door open, we were stunned. The Matthew who had just been raving now looked as if he had experienced some enormous fright, cowering under the bed, shivering, muttering something under his breath. I approached him slowly, and when I was only 2 steps away from him, I finally heard what he was saying. He said, "Die, die." I realized something was wrong, but it was too late. My ankles felt cold, and my body uncontrollably fell forward. I was being dragged backward by Matthew's unexpectedly strong force. In the chaos, I grabbed the cabinet by the bedside. "Matthew, you're crazy." Amid the shouts, James and Sophia rushed forward to help. But the untrained Matthew managed to pull all three of us. In the end, it was only when James raised an axe, threatening to cut off Matthew's arm, that he let go. Sophia quickly locked the door. Fortunately, this time Matthew didn't show any abnormalities. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, looking down at my ankle, which had been scratched and bled, feeling a chill after the fright. Is this still the Matthew I knew? Just as I was thinking, James spoke. "Daiji, why are you wandering around in the middle of the night?" He looked genuinely concerned, but I couldn't shake off a creepy feeling. Because James never called me Brother Dai. We were of the same age, and he always called me Old Dai. I initially wanted to tell them about the discovery of the meteorite, but now I suddenly thought of something, and fear made me stutter. And nothing. I went to the bathroom, passed by his room, found he didn't turn off the light, thought I'd take a look, and then, who knew? Sophia looked puzzled. "But isn't the bathroom over there?" I saw James hesitate for a moment, and quickly came up with a very appropriate excuse. "He's sick, so it's normal to go the wrong way." But I couldn't shake the feeling that James was defending me because he also didn't know where the bathroom was. After Matthew showed no further activity, we quickly returned to our respective rooms. Upon entering, I sealed the doors and windows tightly, afraid that something unclean might be following us. Now, I suspect that James might not be the original James anymore. I thought of those bushes. They could survive in Antarctica because an unknown black substance parasitized them. Since these substances can parasitize plants, could they also parasitize humans? The current power of those creatures might not be enough to parasitize humans, but what about the entity originally hidden in the meteorite? It is highly likely the mother entity of these black substances, the source of all the mutations. There are several reasons why I suspect James. Firstly, James wouldn't call me Daiji. Assuming he really isn't James, he might imitate Matthew and Sophia and call me Daiji. Secondly, Matthew's emotions were volatile, but as soon as James and Sophia arrived, he huddled in the corner as if he had seen a ghost. So, Matthew was either afraid of James or Sophia. Perhaps he didn't want to kill me, but intended to take me away from those two. Thirdly, when James heard me lie and hesitated for a moment before defending me, I suspect it's because he also didn't know where the bathroom was. Lastly, and most importantly, only James went into the cave. All the information we know about the cave comes from him. What if he had been parasitized early on? I can't continue to think about it. I'd rather believe it's just my speculation, that I'm overthinking. After all, He was the one who saved me from the greenhouse. He is my recovered brother, and I can't accept that he died in that icy cave. Perhaps, only by personally exploring the icy cave can I uncover the truth behind all this. Until I know the truth, I cannot trust anyone. However, fate has its own plans suddenly. Antarctica is hit by an 18-level hurricane, and the blizzard it brings is enough to make anyone lose their way in this vast glacier. I can only pretend that I haven't noticed anything and silently wait for the blizzard to pass. But I'm not sure if I can survive until then. Matthew's condition is worsening, and he seems to be losing his sanity. I can't determine the cause of his illness. Everything is beyond my knowledge. He fears the darkness. I tried turning off the lights for him once, but he suddenly bit my hand like a mad dog, screaming, "You will all die. No one can leave alive." His voice remains hoarse, and I suspect something is stuck in his throat because he refuses to eat. I sought out Sophia to inquire about the food situation. But as soon as I entered, I saw several fresh bloodstains on the white floor tiles. In the kitchen, through the shadows, I could see Sophia's busy figure, and the chopping sound of meat echoed from inside. I instantly felt goosebumps. There are only 4 people in the research station, and I just came from Matthew's side. Thinking about it, I realized I haven't seen James for a long time. Could it be that Sophia? My scalp tingled, my mind went blank, my heart tightened, and I almost suffocated. I picked up the mop handle nearby and cautiously approached the kitchen. Regardless, I must confirm whether James is alive or dead. I must find out who has been parasitized. The rhythmic sound of chopping, hazika, made me increasingly nervous as I approached, fearing that Sophia might charge at me with a knife at any moment. However, the more you fear, the more it comes. Suddenly, I stepped on something cylindrical, feeling it roll under my foot for 2 turns, almost causing me to slip. Balancing carefully, I cautiously moved my foot, but the next moment, my pupils contracted, and my whole body couldn't help but tremble. It was a broken finger under my foot. Before I could react, another pair of feet, as if just soaked in a pool of blood, suddenly appeared in my line of sight. Mechanically and in terror, I looked up, only to see Sophia tilting her head in a morbid manner, one exceptionally crimson eye staring at me through scattered bangs. She slowly opened her mouth, revealing 2 rows of blood-red teeth. "So, it's here." In the elongated tone, I bolted away. After experiencing these various changes, I surprisingly calmed down. I needed a trustworthy companion, and that would be the sled dogs. With a determined mind, my steps became steadier, and I even had the energy to glance back at Sophia. Disheveled hair, wielding a kitchen knife, covered in bloodstains, yet because she was barefoot, I managed to distance myself significantly. It's hard to imagine that just a few days ago, she was a sweet and cheerful person, but now she looked like this. Everything has gone haywire. In just a few days, I only wanted to wait for the blizzard to pass. But Matthew went crazy, Sophia went crazy, James's fate is unknown, and now, there's only me left as a sane person. After about 10 minutes, I finally reached the iron railing of the sled dog enclosure. Because the cage was locked, it would take time to open, so I ran as fast as I could to buy myself that time. But now, even though the cage door was open, all the sled dogs inside were dead. Some sled dog carcasses even lay outside the cage, indicating they were dragged out from the bloodstains on the ground. In the distance, I heard Sophia's eerie and morbid voice, "I've seen you." This was a dead end, and I had no way to escape. Just when Sophia was about to turn her head and see me, a hand suddenly covered my mouth from behind. The next moment, before I could react, I was pulled into the darkness behind me. Terrified, my entire body shivered, and I didn't even have the courage to turn around and see who it was. Could there really be a 5th person in the research station? "Hush, it's me." As the person behind me spoke, I almost went crazy. In disbelief, I turned around and saw James's serious face. James wasn't dead. Then whose finger was in the kitchen? I instinctively wanted to ask what was going on, but the gradually approaching footsteps of Sophia made me understand the current situation. James pointed to the lock in his hand, and we exchanged a glance, instantly reaching an agreement. As long as we lured Sophia into the dog cage, we could lock her inside. Sophia's voice was getting closer. I've come in. But make sure not to let me find where you are. Behind the curtain, I could see Sophia's slender shadow. She paced back and forth, eventually stopping in front of us. However, from the bottom of the curtain, it was her heels heading toward us. I could almost hear my heart pounding. Eyes sore, I dared not blink, watching those feet turning in this direction. At that moment, James shouted angrily and kicked forcefully. Old die. Quickly. His kick was quite harsh. I even heard the sound of Sophia's ribs breaking. Without wasting a moment, Sophia was kicked straight into the dog cage by James. The first hurriedly approached and locked the cage. Sophia convulsed on the ground for a moment, then slowly got up. She violently banged against the iron bars like a madwoman, and soon her body became a bloody mess. During this time, I suddenly noticed that her left middle finger was missing. Dazed, I realized that the finger I had stepped on earlier was relatively slender, indicating it belonged to a woman. Due to my extreme nervousness at the time, I had even forgotten this detail. Relieved, I leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. James, I thought she killed you just now. Do you know that? I briefly explained the situation to him, and in the process, I figured out what had happened. Sophia killed the sled dogs, explaining why some of their bodies were already outside. As for the missing finger, she likely severed it herself in her disturbed state. James said he just wanted to feed the sled dogs and was shocked to find a scene of carnage. When he was about to leave, he heard footsteps and saw me. James saved me once again. I realized that I had misunderstood him earlier. Matthew was afraid of Sophia, but how to explain the old die part? Just as I was pondering, James, relieved, sighed, "Luckily, it's not you who got parasitized." I was completely stunned. What do you mean? James, as the first person to retrieve the meteorite, had already noticed something wrong with it. He suspected that someone in the research station had already been parasitized. The phrase, "brother die," was also a test to gauge my reaction. With the misunderstanding cleared, James and I finally sat down to discuss a plan. I must figure out what's inside that cave. Perhaps there's a chance to save them, I insisted. James suggested eliminating Matthew and Sophia to prevent further trouble, but I felt they still retained some consciousness, especially Matthew. From our recent interaction, I sensed he had something to tell me. James agreed to explore the cave together once the snowstorm subsided. However, the following days were far from calm. The sled dogs' bodies were temporarily left outside to keep them fresh until the spring support team arrived for detailed autopsies. The incident occurred one morning when I went out to observe the weather. I detected a strong scent of blood and eventually found some old bloodstains in the bushes. Following the trail, I reached the place where we stored the sled dog corpses. From a distance, I saw a massive figure, estimated to be about 3 meters tall. Although the blizzard had weakened, I still couldn't clearly see the creature's appearance. In theory, there shouldn't be any land creatures in Antarctica that reached 3 meters in height. As I approached rapidly, the sight became clearer, and cold sweat dripped from my forehead. I couldn't describe what I saw. A 3-meter-high mass of flesh, resembling a small hill, lay before me. On the surface of this fleshy mass, there were penguin and seal heads and limbs scattered randomly, without any order. It looked like a pile of animals fused together. I could even see exposed intestines, hearts, and even some fish that had similarly undergone fusion and mutation on top of the fleshy mass. Just as I was staring in shock, a half-bodied seal on the fleshy mass suddenly extended its head and swallowed a penguin head, which was tearing apart a sled dog's corpse beside it. Instantly, blood sprayed out, and all the animal heads on the fleshy mass emitted sharp cries, causing the entire body of the mass to tremble. This included the half-bodied seal. It seemed they had completely fused together, sharing even the sense of pain. I quickly returned to the research station to fetch a flamethrower. James, who had just woken up, hadn't had time to put on clothes. As I expected, though the creature looked huge and disgusting, it was just a fleshy mass. As the flames landed on them, they screamed in agony due to their cumbersome bodies. They couldn't escape. Though my eyes remained open, I felt an unusual calmness, but my mind was in chaos. I had to quickly figure out what the creature that emerged from the meteorite was and eliminate it. Otherwise, the whole Antarctic wouldn't escape its clutches. While contemplating, I unintentionally saw the sled dogs bitten into a bloody mess. I froze on the spot, unable to take my eyes off the sled dog corpses, my whole body horrified. It wasn't until I heard James shout from behind, "Die! What's going on?" I quickly pressed the flamethrower's switch aimed at the sled dog corpses. Because I had just seen James' wristwatch in the belly of one of the sled dogs. I had asked him before, and he claimed to have lost it in the cave. But now, the wristwatch appeared in the belly of a sled dog. The sled dogs had never left the research station, so how could they have run all the way to the cave just to eat his wristwatch? So, it could only have happened that day in the doghouse. But when James told me that day, the dogs were already dead when he went there. Under what circumstances would a dog swallow something inedible? Probably when struggling. The more I thought about it, the scarier it became watching James earnestly extinguishing the flames next to me. My hands trembled badly. Did Sophia really kill the sled dogs? Was James really not parasitized? I only mentioned the mutated creatures, and James, after listening, furrowed his brow. They've actually fused to this extent. Are you trying to merge with me? I directly interrupted James to see his reaction. He hesitated for a moment, then laughed. What time is it? Stop making jokes and go get the fire extinguisher. I shouldn't doubt him anymore, considering his normal behavior and multiple rescues. But why did he lie? However, before I could unravel the intricacies of this mystery, a new unexpected event occurred. Someone had turned off the circuit breaker in the research station. Although the power system wasn't damaged, I still had a bad feeling about it. Matthew. I suddenly remembered that Matthew hadn't turned off the lights since he went mad. I rushed to Matthew's room at the fastest speed, but I was still a step too late. He was dead, and the scene of his death was horrifying. As a doctor who had seen various bloody scenes, I still felt nauseous and started to retch. The room door was wide open, and the key to the lock still had Sophia's grip on it. I saw countless eyeballs of various sizes growing all over Matthew's body. They seemed to be protruding from Matthew's body, and the stretched skin surface was still oozing fresh blood. And the most terrifying part was that as I moved, these eyeballs would also rotate along with it. Matthew was dead, but they were still alive. I had always been curious why Matthew's speech became more and more hoarse, eventually producing only vague groaning sounds. So, with courage, I opened his mouth. Although I was mentally prepared, when I actually saw the huge eyeballs filling the gaps between his teeth, I couldn't help but make a sound. James stood behind accusing me. I told you earlier, she's no longer Sophia. Why didn't you believe me? If we don't kill her now, we'll all end up like this. Though I still couldn't understand why James lied to me about the watch, the reality now told me that Sophia was also a huge threat. I personally checked the sled dog kennel and found, as James said, the cage door wide open, and Sophia was long gone. This meant that Sophia was currently lurking anywhere within the research station. I held my forehead, the excessive tension causing me a splitting headache. While I was contemplating, James had already placed Matthew's body on a stretcher. He said, "Take him outside and burn him." But at this moment, I had completely lost the mood to care about these trivial matters. I was soulless, leaning against the wall, without the energy to even think. "All right, take care of yourself." James didn't insist on my help, leaving me a flamethrower before departing alone. The room fell into complete silence. As I closed my eyes, it felt like countless eyeballs were watching me from every corner of the room. I hugged my head, crouched on the floor in agony, feeling an unprecedented sense of powerlessness. Just when I was about to give up the struggle and resign myself to whatever fate awaited, I suddenly noticed a box under Matthew's bed. It was a place Matthew would always hide things when he was scared, hidden from view by his body, and we had never discovered it. I immediately took out the box and opened it, finding a small camera inside. I suddenly remembered that Matthew had mentioned he would talk to the camera whenever he felt nervous. Eagerly, I opened the camera, finding only a 3-second video inside. In the video, Matthew seemed mentally stable, speaking normally as if it was just when he was initially confined. He sat on the edge of the bed and slowly said, "Be careful of James." A feeling of suffocation hit me as if someone were squeezing my lungs. Hearing footsteps approaching from outside, I quickly returned the camera and shoved the box back into the cabinet where Matthew kept his dirty socks and underwear. In that fleeting moment, James walked in. "What are you doing?" He looked behind me. Matthew's dirty socks and underwear. I pretended to be calm, a hint of disdain in my expression. Then I quickly changed the subject. "Didn't you go to burn the body? Why are you back so soon?" "Oh, came back to get the fire extinguisher." James glanced at the cabinet where I had placed the camera, showing a bit of disdain, and then he took the fire extinguisher and left. As soon as he left, I collapsed on the bed, nervously crouching as if I were about to suffocate. "Be careful of James." Matthew's words echoed in my mind. I recalled the strange occurrences of these days, replaying them over and over, searching for details I might have overlooked. I finally realized that I had confined myself with my own thinking. I overlooked something crucial. If it weren't for Matthew's hint, I might have really been kept in the dark by James. Now that I know that all these bizarre occurrences are caused by unknown creatures inside the meteorite. So why did I think that only Sophia with the key could open the door? Since the unknown creature can turn Matthew into that ghostly figure, can a metal door really stop it? Perhaps Sophia didn't escape from the doghouse after killing Matthew. Instead, she was already dead. But there are still too many unresolved questions here. Why did James save me? Why is James only killing them now? And why did Matthew and Sophia go mad, but not me? I think the answers to all of this can only be explained once I reach the cave below. But at least there are two things I can be sure of. First, it is not invincible, otherwise, it wouldn't act so cautiously. Second, it won't kill me for the time being. I'm lucky, the blizzard completely stopped in the middle of the night. Originally, I said I would go with James, but not anymore. I must find out the truth, discover its weakness, and deliver a fatal blow. So, in the middle of the night, I set off secretly. Along the way, I encountered more mutated creatures. Like the mutated plants at the research station, the creatures here fused with each other, growing into forms completely incomprehensible. Seals' heads were replaced by countless intertwined fish heads, and their own heads grew on their bellies, half of their brains rotting away due to prolonged friction with the ground. The wings of skuas transformed into octopus tentacles with teeth and claws, some of them even sprouting feathers. Moreover, the meaty mass that resembled the one previously devouring the sled dogs became a common sight. I had no time to care about these mutated creatures. I had to reach the cave before James discovered my absence. In the early morning, a smaller snowstorm arose, slowing my pace. Luckily, the snowstorm also covered my tracks from when I came. At 8 a.m., I finally arrived at the entrance of the cave. There was a small patch of protruding snow in front of the cave. I curiously scraped it away, only to find the supplies I left here untouched. He really isn't James. I tilted my head back, exhaling puffs of warm air. From now on, there would be no miracles. James was truly dead. Following the rope, I descended. It was very dark below, and I didn't know how long I climbed until my feet touched a smooth surface. Not far away, there was another opening emitting a colorful glow, illuminating the area brightly. As my gaze slowly moved forward, it didn't take long for me to spot a figure. The flashlight illuminated the person's face, and I immediately shouted, "James!" But he had been dead for a long time, pierced through the chest, and blood had long since frozen. His brain had been scooped out. There was nothing special nearby, only petroleum dripping from the ceiling. I rubbed my sore eyes, and my gaze fell on the glowing opening. I knew the truth lay inside. I must avenge my teammates. The entrance was exceptionally bright. I stood here for a full minute before reluctantly opening my eyes. When I opened my eyes to examine the area, a chill instantly pierced my mind. The cave was expansive, with black tendrils growing on the periphery, interweaving like vines. These tendrils extended toward the central area, where numerous glowing transparent tentacles densely covered the space, emitting the light within the cave. However, amidst these transparent tentacles, a space of approximately 5 meters in diameter remained empty. I could easily imagine that whatever was originally on this vacant space was the truth I sought. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, a dark shadow suddenly fell in front of me, followed by the heavy sound of something hitting the ground. I was startled. Looking down, I saw a body with its back to me. The body seemed as if it had been soaked, with a width of almost 15 meters, covered in protruding blisters. Thinking that someone else had been here and died in a disgusting manner, I suddenly noticed a detail. The person's left hand was missing the middle finger. An electric shock surged through my brain. I slowly and mechanically retracted the foot that was halfway forward, crouched down, and turned the body over. The next moment, I exhaled deeply, almost shouting into the surrounding air, "I will kill you, monster." Sophia was dead too. Her once proud face was now covered in grotesque blisters, almost unrecognizable to anyone who knew her. As my voice echoed in the cave, countless sticky black liquids suddenly surged from all directions on the empty space not far away. The liquid extended its tentacles, climbing one by one towards the top, quickly forming a humanoid figure. I watched helplessly as it transformed into the likeness of James. Since I saw James's body, I had a rough understanding of its mechanism. By consuming the human brain and inheriting memories, it could take on the appearance of that person, deceiving others effectively. It hadn't killed me so far, probably because it needed my brain. As for what it intended to do with it, I had no idea. I didn't understand the difference between my brain and James's brain in its eyes. "David, you're faster than I expected," spoke the James. "Why me?" I cut to the chase. But James was very disdainful. "Humans are incredibly foolish, not even worthy of questioning me." After saying that, I heard a low murmur, clearer than the previous two times, as if it were right beside my ear. However, the language was extremely strange. I couldn't understand a single word, and my heart involuntarily trembled with tension, similar to the previous two occasions. I fell into a desolate shore without sunlight, the beach covered with bizarre creatures, black tentacles drifting in the air. Looking around, it resembled hell. Those things exuded a fear that was insurmountable. By just looking at them, I could clearly sense that any one of them could easily devour me. However, they didn't attack me. They crawled slowly, wriggling, showing no interest in me. This was disdain. I felt my body sinking, and when I looked down, my entire calf was already sinking into the soil. In such a situation, people should instinctively feel fear, but I was surprisingly clear-headed. I knew I was in an illusion, something James wanted me to see. This should be its original planet, a high-end life form that humans couldn't surpass. By now, I suddenly understood why I hadn't gone insane. In reality, it was just that my willpower was a bit stronger, resisting the two previous assaults. These ancient whispers, emitted by higher dimensional beings, were just a language for them, but for humans, it was an entirely new form of cognitive breakdown. This should be one reason why James wanted to preserve a part of my brain. In theory, these higher dimensional beings could easily kill us. However, it was going to great lengths to pick us off one by one because it hadn't fully matured yet. I couldn't let it leave Antarctica alive. Otherwise, it would be the end of humanity. But how could I kill it? I repeatedly recalled, watching myself sinking deeper until my chest, but still no thoughts emerged. There must be something overlooked. "David, calm down." I thought about how Matthew and Sophia had been isolated and why it had let them live for so long. What was it concerned about? What had happened at that time? Right, I remembered. The power was cut off, and Matthew always refused to let me turn off the lights. I remembered how James was slow to dress that day, and it turned out the power was cut off at that time. So it was afraid of light? I suddenly realized, reaching for my waist. The flashlight was hanging there. What I was seeing now was just an illusion. Every action of mine would surely carry over into reality. The illusionary quicksand felt exceptionally real, and as I moved, I sank deeper and deeper. I knew that the more critical the moment, the less I could afford to be afraid. Just as the quicksand was about to cover my neck, I grasped the flashlight. With a sudden force, I pulled my arm out. Due to the intense movement, the quicksand instantly covered my mouth and nose. In the midst of rapid breaths, I struggled to point the flashlight in the direction of the James from my memory. The suffocating feeling intensified, and the hand holding the flashlight was almost submerged. Despair began to creep in. Had I pointed in the wrong direction? Just as I was about to give in, the surrounding force suddenly disappeared, and I fell to the ground without support. The surroundings reverted to their original state. James was writhing in pain, and the skin on its body was peeling off bit by bit. But I knew this wasn't enough to kill it. Otherwise, how could it still be alive with so many lights in the research station? Seizing this moment, I immediately took out the flamethrower and pressed the trigger. But the next moment, I watched as the black tendrils suddenly surrounded and protected James, completely panicking me. These tendrils seemed to come from nowhere, and every time I burned a layer, a new one immediately replaced it. Soon, I ran out of ammunition. I suddenly realized that, with my capabilities, it was impossible for me to kill it and escape unscathed. All I could do was trap it in Antarctica forever. So, I turned to look at the pool of oil next to James's corpse. The cave was filled with oil, and once ignited, it could permanently bury this place. Behind me, the voice of the higher dimensional being came. It seemed I had earned its approval. As a human, you indeed surprise me with your brain. It's enough to sustain me until I leave this place. Just as I thought, it needed a brain capable of withstanding its advanced consciousness invasion. I sneered and took a step into the pool of oil. No. You can only stay here forever. With that, I pressed the trigger of the flamethrower. Although only a tiny spark remained, it instantly ignited the oil, causing a massive explosion. In the last moment, I heard the sharp roar of the creature. Numerous tendrils tried to pull me out of the fiery pit, but upon touching the flames, they quickly melted away. The deafening explosion pierced through my eardrums, and countless rocks fell from above, obliterating everything in this place. Amidst the flames, I cried out in pain, emitting twisted but unyielding screams. Humans are never foolish. People far from Antarctica might never know the secret of this place, but at least they wouldn't have to pay the cost of their lives for it.